ladies and gentlemen, to Carmines Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmines Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed the celebration of Western civilization. In this segment of Carmines Arena, we have arrived at the 100th episode, a milestone. But more importantly, if I've been doing my job, I can declare the programs to have become a touchstone, a type of stone formerly used to test the purity of gold or silver by the streak left on it when it was rubbed with the metal. Thus, the word touchstone has come to mean any test of genuineness or value. Though I can't have always been right, I have striven to being valid and authentic as a truth seeker. Thus, from the outset, I promised never to talk down to my audience, but promised to consistently look up to that audience. Thus, I remain content with my deep respect for the listener, and by my acknowledgement that I am earnestly a truth seeker, as opposed to an habitual truth teller. Ever mindful of the Oscar Wilde observation that if one tells the truth, one is sure, sooner or later, to be found out. I daily read widely and research deeply by dipping into the plethora of cultural publications which purport to convey the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Rarely, upon close or even cursory examination, do they succeed. As well, they shouldn't. For to quote Mr. Wilde ever more insistently, he said in the old days, books were written by men of letters and read by the public. Nowadays, up to the public present, books are written by the public and are read by nobody. And well, they shouldn't be, because so much continues to be tainted by ideology and self-serving opinion, masquerading as thought. Why, even clinical so-called scientific papers published in peer journals have had to be all too frequently recalled because of falsified data reflecting only a greedy, gratuitous opinion feasting on anabolic steroids. Hype, hype, and more hype in a computer-modeled fog and blog of tweets, twitters, and truancy from reality. Flights of fancy that fix what's not broken. Texted expressions of fleshless, disembodied twerps. Modern, of course, yet mutually medieval. For to be medieval, you are required to have no body. To be modern, you must have no soul. No body, no soul is the arid desert of our current culture, with mindless public opinions as plentiful as grains of sand in a barren environment where only cautious wisdom seeks after a promised oasis. An oasis inexhaustible and rich, with abundant reminders of a more deliberate and deliberative past. Whereas our new normal proponents appear satisfied to espy only mirages, which explains their inveterate thirst and incurable irritability. We hear an awful lot about love these days, It is about as authentic as pageant moms who doll up their so-called beloved daughters of 5, 6, 7, and 8, and like they were, well, 25, sexualizing them and objectifying them like a butcher's window display of tender beef. How different is the love of these pageant, ego-laden moms, for example, when you measure it against the validity of love as expressed by Elizabeth Barrett Browning in her quite perfect 43rd sonnet, which follows each rule of sonnet construction with precision and minus the pretty pose, and can be about anyone that is profoundly adored. It starts with a question. Listen, please. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need. By sun and candlelight, I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with a passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death. Yes, the sonnet is palpably perfect, and one of the most difficult formats of many metered forms to be found in the poetic arts. But love itself is perfect, and forever seeks after perfection of its senses and sensibilities. And yet love itself is quite oddly simple to feel and comprehend when it is honestly and deeply felt and engaged. In Leonard Bernstein's great work entitled Mass, he gives the celebrant the opening words to intone, that God loves all simple things, for God is the simplest of all. Yes, yes, for hasn't it been our ages-old credo that God is love? Little else remains more basic and universal. Would that we could engage the power of love with everything we do and say. Gone would be the jumble and muddle we make of existence. Those who feel they can subsist in the absence of God because God is merely a dismissive myth might be reminded what Einstein said of the unseen mysteries all about us. He said, "If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it." In a manner of speaking, the absurdities of our mysteries, our magic, and our miracles are the test of faith, which non-believers shall always bitterly fail and flee, particularly when reaching out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. They'll touch not love, but lust. Let this, my 100th episode, then be entitled Ideal Grace. I choose this to help us both test contentions currently currying to random opinion about extraordinarily important cultural issues, of which the most singularly important is the raising and rearing of children, for to again borrow from the Browning sonnet, children like no one else will take us to the ends of being, but will those untutored ends afford them, now that they are grown, what Browning, God love her, called ideal grace. As things stand at the moment, ideals, let alone grace, are beyond the comprehension of all too many who don't select, but merely settle down to what they want, justifying it by comparing it to something worse. But why not compare to something better or best, ask I. But haven't we grown tired of those who compromise themselves and others? Their self-absorption routinely ornamented with affected piety and self-righteousness. They want no part of one soul reaching out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. It's now, this very moment, that matters. As for ideal grace, that is elitist claptrap. Thus, in a flash, love is replaced by scorn, as shield to bruised feelings, which sense losing the argument to the realities, rather that their preferred relativism measured not by such wacky notions as ideal grace, but by who is winning the argument's chase at a greater pace. All is haste, 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 gimme, gimme, gimme it now. Is it so difficult to be simple? Is it too difficult to believe that the way we raise and rear our children says all there is to say about us, our future? Obviously, the future is society's child growing to adulthood. We've already mentioned the pageant child, all dressed up with no place to go except the wrong way against the trafficking, damned by mom, who's so well-meaning, butter wouldn't melt in her oleo mouth. Let us move on to other oily examples of children born with a job. The job being to legitimize their caretaker's behavior, rounded by their caretaker's dominion of opinion, yet always bearing in mind that the gold standard shall be my theme, gently borrowed from Barrett Browning, love as an ideal grace, not a weak-kneed brace to shore up disgrace. Now hear this, in an exhaustive sociological study, the most careful, rigorous, and methodologically sound study ever conducted on children raised by homosexual parents, incontestably overturns the conventional academic wisdom that such children suffer no disadvantages when compared to children raised by their married mother and father. The study found, however, numerous and significant differences between these groups, with the outcome for children of homosexual caretakers rated suboptimal. Earlier, less rigorous studies that purported to show no difference have been conducted by openly homosexual researchers who have an ideological bias, so much for the scientific method, let alone ideal grace. This study that overturned earlier facile contentions is massive. I do not have the time to engage it as I would like. Thus, in short, the study finds that children reared by homosexual parents have lower educational attainment, reports less safety and security in their family of origin, report more ongoing negative impact from their family of origin, are more likely to suffer depression, have been arrested more often, if they are female, have had more sexual partners, both male and female, are more likely to be currently cohabiting, are almost 4 times more likely to be currently on public assistance, are less likely to be currently employed full-time, but more than 3 times more likely to be unemployed, and are nearly 4 times more likely to identify as something other than entirely heterosexual, are 3 times as likely to have had an affair while married or cohabiting, are an astonishing 10 times more likely to have been touched inappropriately by a parent or other adult caregiver, are nearly 4 times as likely to have been physically forced to have sex against their will, are more likely to have attachment problems related to the ability to depend on others, use marijuana more frequently, smoke more frequently, watch TV for long periods more frequently, have more often pled guilty to a non-minor offense. Thus, when it comes to gay couples adopting kids, every child has a right to have parents, but with respect. Not every adult has a right to have a child, let alone children. That also includes single women who have children from men they barely know, or choose from a list of sperm donors, about which more later. Right now, I must quickly address any who consider my recitations a result of homophobia. A dreadfully poor word, for phobia is an irrational fear. I personally have no such irrational fears. As a classically trained musician, I've had a lifetime of memorable and irreplaceable friends and colleagues who are gay. Were we to cast out gays from our lives, we would be significantly and profoundly impoverished, culturally deprived, and devastated. The gay roster of greatness then and now is a proud one. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Alexander the Great, the Roman Emperor, Hadrian, another emperor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Oscar Wilde, Tchaikovsky, and yes, parenthetically, one day we'll discuss the womanizer Casanova, who, like Don Juan, were closet gays. Well, we would be here for a long time if I continued, but rest assured I don't suffer from the hatred of gays, nor the fear of their greatness. Why, I would be dismissing Benjamin Britten, Aaron Copland, Leonard Bernstein, George Friedrich Handel, Thomas Mann, Lord Byron, Marcel Proust, Francis Bacon, Cole Porter, Virginia Woolf, Tennessee Williams, Noel Coward, etc., etc., and these are only off the top of my head. Yet homosexuals in civil unions, as adoptive parents, must give us pause. The asking of children to legitimize and conventionalize their caretakers is to replace simplicity with semantics, polarities with politics. We've come the sorrowful distance to legitimizing all too many of yesterday's no-nos. No-nos now become today's politically correct fashion. So much for parenting. Now let's turn, as promised, to generating. I refer to the unregulated sperm donor industry, another assault on children objectified to possessions, collector's items showcased for false friends and indifferent neighbors, not to mention exhausted relatives who do the babysitting, particularly grandma. Grandma who has the weight of civilization on her frail yet all too willing shoulders, while mommy plays Atlas, Atlas holding up her world, and what a less than ideal world it is, despite ideology and idolatry of feminist fantasists who go about fulminating and fumigating fixed formulas as if with their cheap perfumes. The first modern-day variety of feminism we've already discussed in an earlier episode. She was the lonely alcoholic American, praised by Hitler, no less, for her racist views, but memorable to me in particular for her essay advising women, and I quote, to find your inner slut. I, of course, am quoting and referring to none other than Margaret Sanger, whose cheap perfume of thought has as much of ideal grace about it as one might find in a woman's prison. An ever-growing incarcerated population who tossed aside the power of femininity for the froth and flappings of feminism, who are now festering, ransacked of old privilege, privacy, and innocent pleasures, and crushingly forced and housed in a purgatory that rarely purges. Some liberation. Feminism is euphoric. In fact, recommends that men be made irrelevant. Males might be insulted by their ambitions, while men, in the fullest sense of the word, are grateful to be spared their dubious attentions. Let's now look at the unregulated donor industry, hailed by women who've made men irrelevant while ironically bringing more of that gender into the world. Are they getting even with the toughs they've reduced to tykes to tinker with and thunder against with impunity? Yes, how easy it is to becomes to corrupt, that is, the meaning and message of love, reduced to mischief. Elizabeth Barrett Browning must truly be glad she's dead. Her love and the grace of her love remaining godly and unsullied by painted simian fingers and tainted finagling. The new movie, Delivery Man, starring Vic Vaughn as a former sperm donor, who discovers that he has more than 500 children, is quite possibly not a Hollywood exaggeration. In the good old USA, we are, as a society of devolving, graceless creatures, do not keep track of how many donors there are, or how often they donate, or how many children are born from donations. Unlike Hollywood's cutesy-woosy happy endings, this sad lack this said lack of tracking donors has real unregulated consequences for the real children donors produce. The Journal of the American Medical Association published a case study of a healthy 23-year-old donor who transmitted a genetic heart condition that affected at least 8 of his 22 offspring, including a toddler who died of heart failure, whilst at work playing God in absentia. Such is their conceit. Are we all so loveless and busy texting to be shocked and outraged and shamed by unregulated practices which lead to the birth and truth of children, to nothing more than deadbeat dads? These conceptions of mind and body are evidence of spiritual depravity and contempt for womanhood. The article, or one of the most informative articles I read, asked, how did we get to this point? For a donorship has evolved from a practice of customized production to an industry that resembles mass manufacturing. As an example, how little one cares for children, and for that matter, their mothers. Back in 1909, the first doctor to inseminate a woman with a donor's deposit did so without her knowledge, while she was placed under chloroform in his office. Wrapped in one fell swoop is the ignorance of the learned represented by the doctor, along with his dehumanized indifference. Some ideal grace. Had the doctor a shred of grace, the procedure as ascribed would have struck him as shameful, and beyond shameful, to the point of criminal. Is the unregulated industry of sperm banks leading to siblings falling in love and marrying each other, innocent of their family origins? Truly revolting, vomitricious in very fact. The overblown notion that we care about our children is patently ludicrous. Its defense at every turn is impeachable. Examples the world over are as plentiful in number to match the quantity exterminated in their mothers' wombs by fiat in China and by feminists' whim elsewhere. Pro-choice being noxious, noisy cant, whereas ideal grace being an elegant celebrant's chant. For with ideal grace one moves from pro-choice to pre-choice in a heartbeat. Before I sign off, allow me, for the sake of balance and out of collective sanity, to cite ideal grace being the daily accomplishment of countless fathers and mothers whose ongoing performance of multiple developmental tasks is deserving of our eternal gratitude. Their tasks and those they guide their offspring to fulfill is civilization's deed to a future whereat our freedoms and prosperity shall not be squandered on wandering errors. Errors bait and switch decoys, decoys designed to snare and impair humanity's share of ideal grace. Until next time, my friends, till next we meet, I implore you once again, keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York, 10538.